Welcome back. In this video, we are going to learn how to write end-to-end tests for a web application using Playwright framework. When it comes to writing end-to-end tests, there are few popular choices like Selenium and Cypress. But in the recent years, Microsoft created this Playwright framework for writing end-to-end tests, which are gaining more and more popularity. So we are going to learn how to use Playwright for writing end-to-end tests. So we have a repository called devzone here, and it contains the application which is built with Spring Boot, Spring Data JPA, Spring Security, and TimeLeaf. We are going to write end-to-end tests for this application using Playwright. So before getting into Playwright, let us first explore the application and how it looks like. So I have cloned the application into my IntelliJ IDEA, and in this application module, we have the actual application. So if I go to src main Java, we have this Spring Boot main entry point class, and if we run this, we'll start the application. So let us go to browser and access the application. So if you access localhost 8080, it is going to show a screen like this. This application is nothing but to store bookmarks. So here we have various bookmarks already saved into our application, and they are categorized into various categories here. You can navigate across using pagination, and you can view bookmarks based on various categories. Okay. And also you can search for, let us say we want to search for junit. You can search based on a keyword, and you can log into our application, and then you can add a new bookmark. So here, suppose if I want to add Quarkus as a bookmark, I can say it as Java, submit. It is going to save. Okay, so once I logged in, if I am the author of this bookmark, it will be showing this edit and delete actions here. If I am not logged in, or if I am not the owner of this particular bookmark, these buttons won't be displayed. So basically this is the application, and we are going to write end-to-end tests for this application using Playwright. Let us quickly explore the Playwright website. So if I go to playwright.dev, it will take us to this page where we can first notice that we can write Playwright tests using different languages. At the moment, it is supporting Java, Node.js, Python, and .NET. In future, maybe new language support may also come. And you can see Playwright supports most widely used browser engines, and then we can run the tests on Windows, Linux, and macOS also. And also usually on continuous integration systems, we want to run the tests using headless manner. So Playwright supports that as well. And if you go to get started page, we can see, suppose we are going to use Playwright using Java and using Maven build tool. So all we need to do is to add this Playwright dependency, and depending on what junit or whatever the test framework that you want to use, you can add those dependencies as well. So once we add this one, this is a typical process to get started with Playwright. So first we'll get an instance of Playwright using this create factory method. And once we got the Playwright instance, we can create a browser instance based on what browser we want to use for running these tests. So here we are using this Chromium, but if you are using Firefox or WebKit, you can choose whatever the browser you want to use. Based on that, you can create an instance of this browser. Once we have the browser instance, we can create a page like this, and then you can navigate to any your application URL or whatever the page you want to test. And then you can assert various information, like you can get title, or you can look up some elements on that page. So this is a typical process of using Playwright. Also, you can pass additional parameters while creating the browser instance. You can pass browser options, like whether you want to run in headless mode or not, or what is the slow motion parameter you want to pass. So you can pass in some browser options while creating an instance of the browser, and then you can run the code, and it will automatically open the browser and execute whatever the tests you are running. Next, let us go to this writing test section. So here again we can see some similar code snippet. So first we are getting an instance of Playwright and then browser instance based on the browser engine that we want to use, and then you get an instance of page from the browser, and then first we usually navigate to a page, and then optionally we can assert whether that particular page has certain title or some elements or not, and then we usually perform some actions simulating the user behavior. Let's say we expect a form to be there, and then we fill in the details and then click on the submit button, and once we submit we may expect the page to be navigated to a next page, a status page, and then we expect there should be some message saying that okay, so and so form submitted successfully, something like that. So we are going to assert that message is there on that page or not. So typically any end-to-end tests will fall into this similar pattern. One important thing to notice is we can run our individual tests in an isolated manner. What does that mean? Let us say we are using junit, and then we are writing a bunch of tests for our application, and there are more than one test in the same class, but we want to run each test in a completely isolated manner. So in that case, if you notice in the earlier code snippet, we are getting a page instance from the browser directly by calling browser.newPage. Instead of that, once we get a browser instance, we create a browser context, and then we create a page instance from that context. So with this one, each of the tests is going to run in a completely isolated manner, so that one test behavior doesn't interfere with another test. So we are going to follow this similar pattern. And if we navigate to this running tests page, here we can see a typical pattern of how a Playwright test using junit file looks like. So here we have a test class, and we have this static variables Playwright and browser, and we also have non-static variables like context and page. And before all, lifecycle callback will be called only once for this test class, where we are going to initialize this Playwright and browser instance. So here, based on the browser engine we want to use, we will initialize the browser instance, and then in the after all callback we are going to close this Playwright instance. But for each test we are going to have this before each callback method, where it is going to create a new browser context and then a new page, so that we'll have a test isolation behavior where each test will run in an isolated manner, and after each test we are going to close the context, and in each test we simulate the user behavior, like first navigate to some page and then assert some elements are there or not, and then trigger some behavior by clicking on a link or button, something like that. Okay, so this is the pattern we are going to follow. In our DevZone repository, we have a folder Playwright E2E tests, in which we have written end-to-end tests using Playwright. And I have used Gradle build tool, but if you are comfortable using Maven, you can use Maven as well. And in our build file, we have configured the dependencies of Playwright, and we are going to use junit file, so we have junit dependencies, and then we are going to use assert.j also for asserting some expectations. And I have added this Jackson data point dependency because I want to configure some of the parameters for writing our tests. So I'm going to use JSON based configuration. So to marshal and unmarshal this JSON to Java beans, I have used Jackson library here. Usually in Gradle or Maven, you usually put the tests in src test Java, but I want to use a different directory for end-to-end tests. So I have created this E2E test folder, and in which I have placed my Java code and resources. But when we are using a different source directory, we need to configure the source sets and then configure dependency scopes here. So I have done that for my E2E test folder, and then I have used that configuration for adding the dependencies here. But if you are using Maven, maybe you simply put it in src test java, and the only reason I used a different structure is when I want to build the application, I don't want to automatically execute these tests. That is one reason I used a different directory structure. And now coming back, if we go and explore under src e2e test resources, I have this config.json. So while running these tests, we want to use some parameters as a configurable parameters. For example, when we are running tests, usually the environment would be different. Like when you are running your test locally, you may want to use localhost 8080, but you want to run tests on a staging environment, that root URL would be different. And also you may want to run tests in a headless mode on CA. So whatever the parameters we want to make configurable, I have used this config.json file and then put all these parameters here. Also in our application, there are two different roles. One is normal user and another one is admin user. So I have configured the credentials of those test users here. And I have this config package in which I have this configuration class, which are nothing but the parameters that we configured in config.json file. And by using this Jackson library, I'm just loading that file and then populating the data into this configuration object and then returning it. So this is how we are going to load this configuration. And finally, as we have seen in the documentation, a typical test using Playwright looks like we have this static properties like Playwright and browser, and instance variables like browser context and page. And using this before all callback, we are going to initialize this Playwright and browser. We can pass the parameters whether we want to run in headless mode or not, what is the slow motion parameter, all these things extracting from our configuration. We are loading the configuration using config loader.load configuration method. And also we are initializing what is the root URL from configuration value. And before running each test, we are going to initialize this browser context variable, and we are creating this browser context by passing certain parameters. For example, I want to run the UI browser instance with so-and-so viewport. So I can pass these parameters like this and then acquire a page instance. And after each test, I want to close the context, and after running all the tests, I want to close the Playwright instance as well. So these are kind of a boilerplate you need for every test. So I have put that in base test class. And then we have this post browsing test class, which is extending from base test. And we have a bunch of tests. So before running these tests, let us start our application. So it will start our application and we can access that at localhost 8080. So we can see this page here. So now going back to our post browsing tests, here our first test is nothing but page.navigate to root URL. So this page and root URL are defined in this base test here. And this root URL is nothing but what we read from configuration object, which is there in this config.json. So this is the root URL. Okay. Now we configured headless mode to false. So when we run the test, it is going to open the browser window and then execute that. So first we are navigating to that root URL, and then we are asserting page.locator, and these are kind of a CSS elements that we can look up using this various selectors. So here I am locating elements which has alert class, and this is nothing but here if you take a look at it, each of these bookmark is a alert element. Alert in the sense I have applied this alert class from Bootstrap framework. So I am counting the number of those bookmarks here and then asserting that should be more than 0. Okay. Now let us run this test and see. So it opened the browser and then navigated to that URL and then count how many hosts are there and close the browser automatically. So similarly, there are other tests where you should navigate between post pages using paginator. So here in this test, what we are doing, we are navigating to this root URL, and then we are locating elements with text next and getting the first element and then clicking on it. And then again we are getting locating an element with the text previous and getting the first element of it and then clicking on it. So basically we are simulating the behavior of user clicking on pagination links. So if you again go back here, we can see there are next and previous, last and first. So user clicking on these various pagination elements we are simulating in this test. So here if we click on this, it's going to open browser window, and here you can see it is navigating to different pages. And the next one is we are testing the search scenario, where we are opening the root URL and then looking up the element with the name query, which is nothing but this input box over here, and then we are filling the input box with flyway. We are basically searching for flyway, and then locating the element with search button and then clicking on that one, and then asserting whether there are elements 6 posts are there or not. So basically this is something that we need to be cautious, because I know what are the data that is available in the current system. I am precisely searching for whether the 6 elements are there or not, but usually this might not be the case in other applications. You don't know exactly how many elements will be there, so you may need to check for whether we have more than 0 elements are there or not, something like that. Okay, let us run this test. So here it opened and then filled flyway and searched, and we can see elements in that response. So similarly, again we are searching for a specific element, and then we can navigate between different pages using pagination. So we are simulating that behavior here. So let us run this test and see. So first we are searching for boot, and we got the results, and we are navigating between different pages over here. Okay, so that is how we can test it. And finally, we are having a test here, should view post by category. First we are navigating to root URL, and then this is nothing but a class that we apply for these category elements. So we are looking it up and then clicking on the first category and then asserting whether there are elements or not. So if we run this, okay, so that is how basically if you take a look at it, it is kind of a very similar. First we navigate to certain URL, and then we assert by looking up various elements using various locators, and then asserting whether you have the expected data or not, just like any other basic JUnit test. And here we can use various locators to identify the elements. Here we are using a class name as an element as a locator. Here we are locating an element based on the text we have on the buttons, and here we are locating an input box with a certain name value, and we are filling the data. And similarly we can locate using various locator availables in Playwright. And then we have authenticated user actions test, and again this is extending base test here, and here most of the user actions that can be done after logging in only we are testing in this class. And here first thing is we should be able to log in using normal user credentials, and as this is a common requirement for every test, here I have created a private method do login by taking this email and password. And first we are navigating to login, page and then locating the elements with the ID username and enter the email in that input box, and then again providing the password and then clicking on the button, and we are waiting for the page to redirect to this posts page and then asserting whether the current URL is post or not. So this is a common method that we use for most of the tests here. So I have extracted that into a separate private method. So once we log in, so here again we are using this normal user credentials to log in, and then we are clicking on this add button, add link. So let's say once we log in here, we have this add button, which is actually hyperlink, and once we click on it, we need to enter URL, title and category. So we are providing the values for all these values. Okay, and the third one, this category, is a drop down which has auto completion capabilities. So we are clicking on it and then filling with Spring Boot, and it will show some of the options, and then we are pressing enter button. So there are various methods that are available to fill the text in a input box and to simulate the behavior of button press either on enter or on shift, things like that. And then finally we are submitting that form and expecting the redirect URL to be /post. Only when it is successfully created this new link, it is going to redirect to post page. So that's what we are testing in this should add new post method. And then again similarly should edit post. So in this test we are logging in with admin credentials, and then we are clicking on this. Once we log in with admin credentials, every post will show this edit buttons, right? Edit and delete. So we are locating the first edit button and then clicking on it, and it will take us to this edit screen with the pre-filled values of this, and then we are changing the values to a different thing. Okay, and then submitting the form and expecting. So if I change it to something else and click on submit, and it should take me back to this post page with the different values. Okay, so finally we have this delete test where we are again logging in with admin credentials, and then so basically when you click on this delete, we are showing a alert box to confirm whether you want to delete or not. So we are accepting that alert using this on dialog accept here. So it is going to click on OK, and that will be deleted, and it is going to redirect to the post page. So these are the various authenticated user actions we grouped into this authenticated user actions test class. So basically in end-to-end test, this is the common pattern. First you navigate to a page, okay, and then you locate some elements, and then you perform some actions like filling a form and then submitting or clicking on a URL and asserting what is the next page you are expecting. And here you may also expect, okay, once we successfully edit some form, maybe you are showing some message saying that post edited successfully, updated successfully, things like that. You can also look up, okay, this page should contain so and so text, something like that. So this is how you usually write tests using Playwright. I have covered only the common use cases and common approaches for writing tests, but there are a lot more than this. You can go to this documentation and we can see even you can even take screenshots also. When any test fail, you can take all the screenshots, and also there is a special mechanism to handle authentication so that you don't have to log in again and again. So there are much more than this. So I would highly recommend you to go to this documentation and see what more features that Playwright is offering. So I hope this video is helpful, and thanks for watching. Bye bye.